Hello, my name is James Yu. Um, Today, I'm going to be completing my community outreach project, and I'll be speaking to Jordan Zhang. So Jordan Zhang is a close family friend of the Eames family, and the Eames family are a family from Connecticut in the UK, and the son, William, son of Matt and Joe, has Duchenne muscular dystrophy. William is currently 12 years old. He was diagnosed at around age 3. And I had the opportunity to speak with Jordan through a, a series of outreach efforts. So my outreach for this project began with the MDA Association. I contacted their support page because I recognize they have a lot of resources for advocacy and community efforts just like this one. And they were able to refer me to a number of resources, which unfortunately didn't end up being most fruitful. I was able to join and connect through DMD Facebook groups, through parents and patients alike, some healthcare professionals as well. And I also did individual reach out to blog writers. And while doing all these outreach efforts, I came across the Eames family. And I think the Eames family really stood apart to me because they're able to create almost a movement behind William. Starting from their blog that Joe started shortly after the diagnosis, where she shared things of her anxiety, her depression, how she felt about all of it. And when I was reading, her personal stories became something of hope, where she was able to take this terrible diagnosis and share her own feelings and own thoughts and ideas to a wide group of people who were all able to connect to her and to William. And so I really wanted to reach out with them and connect with them on this project. And I wasn't able to reach them directly, but I left a blog post, a comment on the blog post. And Jordan actually contacted me from that. So I've had some correspondence with Jordan over the last few weeks, and we were able to set up this interview. So he requested I give him some of the questions so he would have some time to prepare. So he's done that. I've also written down some questions I want to ask him as well. Some things I really wanted to explore from their story is how DMD is really more than a diagnosis. I think that goes without saying, but how it affects the people around you for a really long time. And these effects are more than just, grief when you hear a phone call or something like that. It's something that lasts a long time. It stays with you and has a lasting impact on your character. And I also wanted to find the story about what it means to inspire a community. Really, where does that come from? The motivation to inspire and the leadership and what it means to persevere beyond a diagnosis.
Oh, hello, hello.
Hello. All right, Jordan, I just started the recording. If we want to go through and do some introductions real quick, if you can tell me a little bit about yourself. Um, how did you meet the Eames family and how close are you?
Yeah, perfect. So my name is Jordan. I'm 20 years old and I was born in Maryland. I go to the Rockland Community College and I study communications. So I've been in Maryland since I was 5, but before that I went to live in the UK. And I know the Eames family because, my parents went to school in the UK and they knew each other. So I'm like a family friend. They weren't able to make it today, but they gave me permission to speak on their behalfs about their experiences and just everything in general.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that. And if you could please pass on that, I'm really grateful to the Eames family as well.
Of
So
course.
just jump into it. So a key focus I want to focus on in this project is talking about how DMD and these life-threatening diagnoses are really a lot more than a diagnosis. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes besides the medical, the biological aspects of it. So I wanted to ask, do you know anything about what it was like when William was actually diagnosed? Were you there for it? Do you remember any of the reactions, anything that went on around that time?
Yeah, so William was He's now like 11 and he was diagnosed at 3 years old. So at the time I was around 12 years old. And by this time I had moved to the US. So I wasn't really there when it happened. But I received the news by phone call. So it was a big just shock to me in general. At first everyone was just like really confused because like nobody really knew what it was. And it
Right.
took like lots of research and just Googling to like realize, oh, like this is really serious. Like maybe he might be in like trouble. So after all the confusion was settled, then that's when everyone kind of like sobered up pretty much just really quickly. It's just like, oh, like we gotta take this very seriously. So I guess it was just like a general understanding that like, my parents were really concerned about William's parents' well-being. And, we took the trip to visit them shortly after the diagnosis was made. And I just remember going with my mom and dad to like buy gift cards and just stuff to make them feel better, and this was all before we went home, and it was just like a really big deal, and it still sticks in my mind to this day.
Right. Um, I can definitely understand how that would be a major experience for you and everyone involved, right? I think it's wonderful they made that trip and really made that effort to be there for them. Can I ask, what was that trip like? Do you recall anything from that?
I mean, to be honest, like for me, I was 12 at the time, so it was just more like a vacation more than anything else, but I
I,
do regret that. I wish I took it more seriously, and now that I have like a better understanding of just everything, I do wish I, showed more respect other than just like, oh, I can skip a few days of school.
right. I understand. I think if I were in your shoes, I definitely would have done the same as well. Going back to that part where you said you wish you took it more seriously, I think that's a really common experience for people who are dealing with news of really serious situations that, and a lot of these things, they take a long time to understand. And I really think that's a very common experience. I've dealt with that before in the past too. So if it's okay with you, I would like to ask what that was like, if you could elaborate a little more. And what exactly was the realization that you came to now that made you feel this way?
Yeah, like just as I said before, I wish I understood it a bit more at the time. Like I was able to recognize that like everyone around me was upset and it was a really hard time for them, but it just didn't really click with me until much later, like, oh, like this is really, really, something big. And looking back on it, I've realized that there was much more going on. I just remember how upset Joe was, and she really tried her best to be, very strong and happy for just us. And when
Mhm.
she visited, but it's like she was already grieving for William, and it's really sad. He was just 3 or 4 years old back then, and I can't really imagine what it's like to like be in her shoes. And yeah, it's rough.
Yeah. And especially what you said about her having to keep up that appearance and being grateful for your visit as well. That must have been really tough on her.
Yeah,
Something that really caught my attention with the Eames family and was one of the main factors why I reached out to them and you specifically, and that of course led to our conversation today. By the way, thank you so much for doing this again.
of course.
Um, so from the blog posts and the Facebooks and the huge online following I've seen, right? They've got this really powerful community support, and it feels like everyone's really got their back, right? And what I mean by that, I'll put a few images up in the edit here right now, but they've
Mhm.
been able to raise over 22,000 pounds going towards Duchenne research in the UK. They've partnered with their local professional rugby team and their schools. And last year, they were able to set up a massive community event. They had a combined triathlon and a fun run that had over 300 people come out, and they were able to raise a lot of awareness and money. And they're actually about to do that again in a few weeks. I'll put that flyer up here as well. But my question to you about that would be, what has that been like to kind of watch it grow? And I'd love to know about how the movement started and how we got to where we are today with this really big movement, I guess.
Yeah, I'm happy that they got like so much attention, but just to be like completely transparent, I wasn't too involved in the beginning. I mean, just the distance and then, we're American and all of that. So for what I've seen and just heard from online, I've like been there for part of it, just for visits and everything. So I could definitely talk about that. Um, excuse me.
No problem.
Yeah, just like you said, the growth is really amazing. I think every time I visited, there's been something new going on and just something that else they've got planned. So even though I'm, more on the connected side of things, even I find it really hard to like keep up. And I'm actually going to go back to help them volunteer setting up the triathlon this month. So that's really exciting for me. And just in general, um, yeah, while we're on this subject, I do want to touch on a misconception that a lot of people kind of really have. So, um, everyone kind of victimizes everything. If I just had to put a word to it, like, it's where people kind of just assume like they're getting all of these things just for having the disease, like this or that.
Right.
And yeah, I think the Eames and William are just a perfect example of, you know, why that's never really been the case. They've done all of these amazing things, but it's always been their own hard work and their own outreach and willingness to make something good out of this very horrible diagnosis. And that's something I really want to address because I think that's a really common misconception and it's really hurtful. And I've seen them have to deal with that as well. And I wish people would stop thinking that way
Mm.
and just, look past it.
Yeah, I completely understand. Thank you so much for sharing that. I definitely understand where you're coming from. And I do think that is a really common idea that people have where they're like, oh, like someone who just has something, a disease or a life threat going on is obligated to these things. But like you said, that's really never the case. And the fact that they're able to achieve everything despite what's going on is really, I think that's a really beautiful testament to the kind of people they are and what they want to achieve. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Of course.
All right. So while we're closing out this interview, I want to give you the opportunity to say anything that you have on your mind, right? And really get any thoughts you might have off your chest, I guess. So my question would be, what do you hope people can take away from William's experience? And are there really any messages or final thoughts from the Eames family or on your end as well? I'd love to hear it.
Mm, a big takeaway I had from just the whole experience of being, close family friend of theirs is this situation is kind of morbid, but kind of like the importance of the how to say this fragility of life. So, I've more or less watched William grow up, and even though it's on and off in person, and when I used to be in the background of our parents just FaceTiming or whatever, it's still a very strange feeling to me. So, I mean, he was diagnosed at 3, so he had what only 3 years of a normal childhood. That's barely anything, and then like Dutchen's gonna be there for all of it, but he's not super negative about it. His parents aren't either, and that's just super, inspirational for me. So I guess in a way, it's like me recognizing just the fragility of life and just the importance of it. Also, like for example, just how easily it can be shaken up, and I guess redefined. Being able to stick through all of it just by finding something that's really important to you, I find that's something I took away on my end, and I would love to pass it on to other people. And that's what really makes William such an inspiration to me. Yeah, like yes, he's younger than me. You know, he's only what I think 12 right now, but he's gone through so much more than I could even imagine, and I
Right.
think that's amazing. Um, I also think that these amazing things happen once you realize that what's important to you and really just making things that you want to see happen. I feel that, we're kind of the same, like I said, we're kind of the same age, even though we did grow up in different parts of the world, with what's different from the US and my almost split background with the UK. We're still part of this generation that sees everything that's going on and doesn't always want a big part of it.
Right.
Like I'm definitely guilty of that, but what the Eames have been able to do is, and I think it's really cool how they started from this small blog that just the mom started to help cope and understand it, document it all, and it's all grown into this really big movement, and it's really real, and it's becoming something important. And I just like the idea that she wanted to give herself hope, and it's kind of grown into sharing hope with just everyone, and collectively inspiring others. That's just so cool to me. And I guess what I'm trying to say is once you understand what you want to give to the world and try your best to do that every day, that's how people just follow suit. A lot of young people, like myself, are scared to be the first in doing something, taking that first step forward. But when it comes to things like this, there's not many people that know about or want to do anything about it.
Right.
And I think what I've really learned from the EAMS is just to be brave, be the person to step forward, you know, be the leader, just drive. If you have something you really believe in, drive that belief forward.
Right. Um, yeah, thank you so much for sharing all that. I can tell that's really personal to you. And I think that's a really strong message that a lot of people, like what you said, like we are the same age, right? We were both 20. Um,
Hmm.
and I definitely agree that we are part of this almost a bystander generation where we want to do things, but we don't want to be the first one to do it. And I think what you said really means a lot. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, of
I really,
course. Thank you for taking the time to reach out. I really appreciate that too.
of course, thank you so much for working with me on this. It's been a great opportunity for me, honestly, as a learning opportunity. And I'll be sure to pass on the messages that
All
you
right.
really value a lot. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
All right. So that was my interview with Jordan. I found it really insightful. There was a lot of things we covered that to me were, it was really interesting to hear the human part of what we learned in class, right? Um, I took this class because I wanted to learn more about what the class is called, disease mechanisms and therapies. I wanted to learn about how these diseases worked, how we treated them, and how we researched them. And I was never expecting from this class to learn so much about the human side of what we do as STEM majors, as scientists, as researchers, and the people that we are able to affect. So to me, this interview was a really wonderful experience where I really got to see all of that come together. So for me, my key takeaways from the interview, I really loved the things Jordan was saying about how once you focus on trying to make an impact, people will follow suit. Or not even try to make an impact. Once you focus on one idea that means a lot to you, that's when people follow. And that's how you can build a movement just by being the first one to being brave enough to be the first one to step up and take charge. I thought that was something wonderful that, it's something you might hear. It's motivational, right? Um, it could be interpreted as cliche, but it's a phrase that I'd never thought could apply to a medical situation like this, a disease like this, where even in the face of a diagnosis where, like he said, Joe was already grieving William, right? At the diagnosis, she was grieving her child. He was still 3, like he was already dead. And that's to come out of this from the one idea that you have that you want to give yourself hope and others hope and be able to build something really amazing out of it is not something I could have ever believed would apply to diseases, to research, to medicine in the way that it has. I think something else that really stuck out to me was as Jordan was talking about, he's not part of the direct family, right? He's not related to them by blood or anything. Um, but he's close enough to see just a little bit more behind the scenes than we do, right? We are complete strangers to these people online. they're never going to be able to know us, and yet they're giving us such insight into their lives. And Jordan just being this one step closer is so much more strongly affected than I could have imagined. Just in the way he was talking about being about the experiences, how they stuck with him. Um Something I thought was really interesting as well was, I guess, kind of the difference that 1 degree of connection can make. And what I mean by that is Jordan isn't related to the Eames family directly. He's not related by blood. He's not part of the family, but he's still strongly affected. So I want to say thank you so much, Professor Cho, for this quarter. I think this class has been one of the most insightful I've ever taken. Um, the project has really opened my eyes to a lot of things. Um, yeah. And so with that, I want to conclude this project. And I want to say thank you so much, Professor Cho, for putting this class together and for this quarter overall. It's definitely been one of the most insightful experiences and the most meaningful classes I've taken at UCLA so far. And I really appreciate everything you've done for learning and for us students throughout the quarter. So thank you so much.